Okay, so we have time for a few questions, and I've got a few announcements about logistics. So who has a question for our panel? Oh, someone does.
I'll ask one.
Yeah, go ahead, Joanne.
So I work for Gulf Restoration Network. One of the projects that I work on is the Sable Trail pipeline in Florida that is attempting to connect to the Transco pipeline, which the Mountain Valley pipeline would also connect to. And so one of the things that we've been concerned about is the fact that, yes, there has been some power plants proposed in Florida that would source this gas. There's also numerous LNG export facilities that are not being taken into account as part of both the eminent domain claims, but also the comprehensive environmental and community analysis. How is it that the Mountain Valley pipeline is starting to take into the larger downstream accounts of this project, given the recent approval of the Sable Trail pipeline in Florida? Is that something that y'all have gotten a chance to consider at all? I know it's recent, and so y'all have been working on this on a different part. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that's a very detailed question, not one that I have the capacity to answer. So Greg Buford in our office may be able to answer that, but I wouldn't be able to.
Can I reframe a question maybe?
Sure.
Totally. So, one of the issues that we see is that FERC as a regulatory agency, in our opinion, tends to do a fairly poor job with their NEPA analysis. What do you think the potential is in the long term, not in the immediate term, given the stalemate in Congress, but the long term for reforming the Natural Gas Act and transitioning those powers from FERC to PHMSA?
That's an interesting question, and also one that I can't answer. I can say that it's important to look at, to ask the question, how do we define need, okay? And in our view, need is not that the project makes economic sense to a vertically integrated utility that is ultimately going to benefit on both sides of the transaction, and that will be able to recover the cost of these two projects. We're looking at $8 billion in capital investment, and the risks really aren't borne by the company under a structure we have with public utilities. They're borne by us and the ratepayers. So it's very important that the need question not be answered from the framework of does this make economic sense for the company. The need question needs to be answered along the lines of, do we need this infrastructure to keep the lights on, for electric reliability, to heat our homes? And that's the question that we hope that FERC will answer, and that it should answer through both the NEPA process and through its decision-making under the Natural Gas Act.
Larry.
I have a question for the Wildlife Federation. This may go just past your field here, but you talk about transparency, right? One of the things that I think about, though, or that we've heard from other presenters today, are the impacts to wildlife if there is a disaster, right? It's in a high-risk category. What's your sort of take, or what's your organization's take on the reliance of, in a water situation, dispersants, which gets rid of the oiled duck picture that everybody used to see, but then sinks the, right to the bottom and creates food web problems for our fish and all kinds of, upwards migration of those toxics. So how do you look at that piece? It's kind of, I guess it's in your wheelhouse of wildlife, but yeah. Is that something that you guys are tracking, the dispersant risk, and how we're dealing with out of sight, out of mind solutions as opposed to make it better solutions?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. There are people at the National Wildlife Federation, like right here in New Orleans in our office, that is working on that. I mean, for us, it's always looking at the balance of wildlife risks. The issue that's actually coming up in this example in the Straits is actually the issue of open burn of oil if it's on the surface. It's actually not allowed in the Straits of Mackinac right now. Should it be? And you're balancing a whole set of risks. I mean, our focus, of course, is always on the ecosystem health and restoration aspects. And we have a fairly skeptical view of dispersants for some of the reasons that you're talking about. Although it's not where I know the specifics of that. It's an excellent question for us to always look at those balance of risks.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. Sarah, do you want to?
Okay, so when I listen to environmental groups, I often hear a distinction between safety and environment. environmental laws take on public health issues, it doesn't strike me that safety is that far away. And I'm wondering why you think environmental groups make this distinction and whether they'd be interested in taking on safety or whether they should take on safety as an issue in itself.
We're looking at policy should
We're seeing a real trend towards a combination or a synergistic approach, and I'll just use air. Air as an example, right? So EPA is considering the power plant as part of that, and mercury rules, for example, and as part of those deliberations, they've included, analysis regarding pollution's impacts on asthma and cancers and various health impacts. And so I think we're seeing a trend towards agencies being more receptive towards that type of analysis. I think it does help with a cost-benefit analysis and justifying proposed regulations, and so that's adding further momentum to the combination. And I think it really comes down to hearts and minds, right? Some people care very much with their children and are motivated to take action and respond because of their children's health. And some people take action because they're really connected to a place. A speaker this morning, Alexis, was incredibly moving and effective in sort of describing the impacts on the place. And both can obviously work together, but we're definitely seeing more combination health and environmental advocacy.
Yeah, I think just in the macro sense, it's a great question because I think environment and conservation groups to thrive and be relevant have to look at environmental health, have to look at safety, have to look at those impacts. And I'll just give a quick example. My own organization and region, I referenced this before, the Flint water crisis. Right? And I'll say, just one up, because this was true of environmental groups and conservation groups across the region, said, well, it's not, our first reaction is not really our issue, right? Because it wasn't actually a water quality issue, it was governance and it was other things. But then, and we worked on wastewater treatment and we worked on water quality. And then it was like, well, wait a second, how can that possibly not be our issue? Right? Because this is a toxin in the spot. There are, of course, wildlife impacts when you have lead going out, put that aside for a minute. And if we're not focused on what matters to people directly and the health, then we're not doing our jobs. I think the question you raised gets at that same point. So I'm a huge advocate, and I would say the Flint water crisis sent shockwaves throughout the environmental community in our region and perhaps nationally, and based on some of those very questions that you're talking about.
Okay, thank you so much. One more time for the panel. Let's give them a round of applause.